Yes, I'm sorry we did not upload a waiver wire video today. What the hell do you want me to talk about? Do not pick up any of these bumps off the waiver wire. The only guy that is interesting is Gus Edwards, dependent on the extent of the Dobbins injury, and we have no info on it, and we already talked about it last night. I'm sorry. Don't go run and pick up David Moore, just like y'all loved Jalen Coker a week ago. It's a trap. But anyway, let's go ahead. Let's dive into some fantasy football teams here. Try our absolute best to get these teams ready for the playoffs. First team review coming out from Kaler. My friend, really do appreciate you. Excited to dive into this. Saying, hey Mason, thanks for everything. Appreciate you. This is a keeper league. I traded away a bunch of my 2025 picks for this stacked team. So did a bunch of other teams as well. Do we have the edge? Any tight end or defensive pickups you'd recommend for the playoffs? P.S. was in Austin last week. Loved it. I'll be back for sure. Love to hear that, my friend. And yes, you better believe, of course, we are rocking our University of Texas, Austin, my number one place to be. But anyway, let's go ahead and let's check this out. The team name, my least favorite thing in the world, the IRS. Looking at the overall league, we are currently third in the league analyzer in total value, but in reality, there's just a group of 4 teams here, right at the very top that, I don't know, they're the juggernauts of the league. These are the only teams that you have to worry about contending with whatsoever. Let me hook you up with a free trade question and a free start set question, just in case there's anything else that you want to follow up afterwards. But anyway, I do also want to discuss just for a bit before we dive into this, my personal hesitation when it comes to going through and trading away future picks in a redraft league, or I don't want to say a redraft league, in a keeper league. So I personally, and I played in every fantasy football format that you could ever imagine. Obviously, I'm not making it sound like that makes me better at fantasy football by any means. No, but I'm just obviously an absolute sicko. Name a format, I've played in it outside of IDP just because I do not want to get into defensive players. But regardless, I've played in keeper leagues where you can trade away your future picks to go through and contend that season. But what it inevitably turns into is if you don't sacrifice your next season, you really can't win the year that you are in. Where it makes a lot of sense in Dynasty, right? To be able to sell future Dynasty rookie picks, to be able to go through and contend that season. Because if you were looking at the draft, it's a limited player pool. It's only rookies. It's not like you're redrafting an entire team minus your 3 keepers that you have going into the next season. So it is completely fine. You don't necessarily have to sell out your next year and give you a 0% chance to contend. But going through and looking at what you have, say, with a keeper format, if you only keep 3 players from a year-to-year perspective, and you're forced to go through and sell like a future second, a future third, a future fifth, and try to just win that season, you effectively have to give up the following year just to contend this year. Or at least that's what you're making it sound like when you were talking about everybody else or the other top contenders in the league going through and selling future picks to try to get in here and win this second. So I'm not a big fan of selling future picks in a keeper league. Obviously, dynasty format, 100% a different beast. But here, just to let you know, that's where I'm at. But let's go ahead and let's dive into quarterback. Quarterback, it is a 1 QB league. You have Lamar, Daniels, Jameis currently on the roster. Now, I know a lot of people are going to go, oh my gosh, why the hell are we rostering 3 quarterbacks? 1, you can see that there are no quarterbacks sitting out there on the waiver wire. And 2, maybe this isn't a 1 quarterback format. Maybe this is a super flex league. As you have a bunch of people rostering quarterbacks. Honestly, regardless, I understand where you're coming from at quarterback, rostering Jameis, because obviously Lamar and Daniels both have the week 14 bye. What I would say, if it's a 1 quarterback format, obviously I would love to go out there and I'd love to sell Daniels with a tight end to maybe go get to a true elite level tight end option, especially if a team's not looking to contend in next season. Then at that point, I would assume that you should be able to get a decent amount for Daniels, who could be a very solid keeper next season. But obviously, if it's a super flex league, we sit still here as is and have nothing to do at quarterback whatsoever. You'd be in a phenomenal spot. But regardless, whatever way you cut it, we have the best quarterback room in this league. Going over and looking at what we have at running back, we're currently sitting with Achane and Kenneth Walker. So we have an elite RB1 and an additional borderline RB1 here as well. So super comfortable spot to be at running back. We have James Cook. With Cook, a 3-down running back in a great offense, really nothing to discuss on that front. So you are in a phenomenal situation. Pretty much top to bottom here, especially as we go down and you look at the depth that we have with like Rico Dowdle. This is a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. So the depth doesn't matter a ton. Obviously, Dowdle wouldn't be a player that we would look to keep next season. So if you could find somebody in your league to potentially take Dowdle from you, and where we could send them Dowdle and potentially somebody like Garrett Wilson to go get that wide receiver upgrade, especially if there's an outside chance that we are having to deal with Aaron Rodgers going elsewhere, or maybe they're pivoting off of Aaron Rodgers, whatever way you want to look at it. I think that could be interesting. Obviously, a lot of these wide receivers, should be better next season, especially if you were looking to keep them. Puka's only in his 2nd season. Cooper Kupp next year should be a very minor piece in comparison to Puka, given the age. Kupp will be 31, pushing 32. Puka will be in year 3 of his NFL career. Garrett Wilson will be in year 4 of his NFL career. Malik Neighbors will be going into year 2. Harrison will be going into year 2. Obviously, Olave should be a bigger piece next season than he is right this second. But regardless, I think that you should be in a much better spot, of course, next year at wide receiver, but we still should be able to contend. I'm very excited to have Puka as my wide receiver 1. Would I be ecstatic to have Garrett Wilson as my wide receiver 2? No. Wide receiver 1? No, but wide receiver 2? Yeah, I'm excited to have Garrett Wilson as my wide receiver 2. Would I be excited to have Malik Neighbors as my wide receiver 1? No. I'm very excited to have him as my wide receiver 3. I'm excited to have Harrison as my wide receiver 4. So wide receiver, we're great. And going over to quarterback, we picked up a viable streamer in Disley. We have Ferguson here as well. For me, just given the Ferguson injury, as well as the fact that obviously you have Brandon Cooks coming back into this offense, and this is just a much worse offense now that you have no Dak Prescott, I would drop Jake Ferguson for Jonnu Smith myself. And then you can just kind of play the hot hand between Disley and Jonnu, who both have obviously been fantastic so far. And in terms of any other moves we could potentially make with this team, I don't necessarily see much. Again, I want to reiterate that if it's a 1 quarterback format, I would love to take Daniels, send him with a tight end to go get to an elite level tight ends. If it's a super flex league, we're chilling. I drop Ferguson, pick up Jonnu Smith. I would like to see if we could send Dowdle and a wide receiver such as Garrett Wilson or Malik Neighbors, especially if you were maybe making a deal with a team that wasn't looking to contend, to go get a wide receiver for next season. But you're in a really great spot. You've already put yourself in a position where there are really only 3 other teams in this league contending with us. Obviously, we are 3rd in the league analyzed here as well. We have a phenomenal roster. But again, I really do appreciate you. I hooked you up with that free start set question as well as that free trade question. So just in case there's anything else that you want to see from me, don't hesitate to reach out to me and let me know. I'd be super happy to check out anything that you want to send my way, right, guy? But let's move this over for Declan, who says Achane over CMC and maybe Barkley. To say Achane over CMC, I'm completely fine with. And honestly, based off the projections that we're looking at with this offense in San Francisco for this week, I think I would pivot over, and I think we need to move Achane ahead of CMC in our rest of season rankings, because it now seems like Brock Purdy is going to be missing more time than we initially thought. But to go with Achane over Barkley is just insane. If you're looking at Achane, over the past 2 weeks, sportsbooks had projected out the Miami Dolphins to be a top 5 offense in the NFL. You just had great matchups. You're seeing this week, actually, the projections come down a considerable amount with Miami, where their implied team totals down at like 21.5 points, opposed to like 26.5 points where it was previously. So I think that you will have some regression for HN. I still think that he is definitely in the same tier as like CMC. You can make an argument. I would probably put him at a CMC now with the Purdy news. But to have him ahead of Barkley, I definitely think would be insane, to be honest. Now, our next question coming out from Keeper Wed says, for my flex spot, give up Dobbins for London. Post Dobbins injury, 100%. That's the only thing you need to think about this one too much now. But honestly, I would have done this pre-Dobbins injury as well. Now, Yak Season coming out with our next trade says, just did this trade offer after McCaffrey's dud. Is this a win or a loss? This is such a win. It is laughable. Again, like I said, I'll probably move McCaffrey down our rest of season rankings just a bit based off the projections that you currently are looking at in San Francisco, where we are seeing the Niners project out to be a worse offense this week. I think that they are 7-point dogs against Buffalo. So I think the expectation is you have no Brock Purdy yet again. So given the Purdy injury lingering a bit, I think we move CMC down our rest of season ranks. But Kareem Hunt's about to be a 0 with Pacheco coming back in. Jonnu Smith's a low-end tight end 1. This is such a win, it's not even funny. Like if this would be one of the very few deals where if it got out of my league, I'd be like, okay, I'm fine vetoing this. Frank the Tank coming out says, week 13, I have Disley as well. Njoku's on the waiver wire. Should I pick him up? Really appreciate you. Excited to check this out, my guy. Running back, Brees, Henry, auto starts. Wide receiver, Puka. We probably go Tyreek. Pickens and Tyreek will actually be very close, though, and it will be something we have to think about for this week. Actually, if you look at the Underdog projections, you will see that they have Pickens ahead of Tyreek Hill, at least last I checked. I mean, we can go through and we can pull this up. But last I checked, I think they had Tyreek higher, lower, like 62.5 receiving yards or 63.5 receiving yards versus George Pickens is higher, lower, 70.5 receiving yards. And also, again, you have lowered expectations with the Dolphins offense this week if you're looking at sports books. Going over to tight end, definitely cut Hunter Henry if you have Disley as well. I honestly, F it. I would cut Hunter Henry and maybe even Will Disley, and I'd pick up David Njoku and roll with Njoku and Kincaid. Regardless of however you cut it, David Njoku wants to be the guy I want to have in the starting lineup. This week, I'll throw Kincaid in there because we can't select Njoku with him on the waiver wire. And then Chase Brown is an absolute auto start here as well. So really the only thing is possibly pivoting off of Tyreek to Pickens is going to be the main thing that you want to look at. Can y'all please let me know in the live chat right now, would y'all rather start Tyreek or would y'all rather start Pickens this week? And obviously, if y'all wanted to go through and if y'all wanted to like say, oh no, Pickens is going to go lower than 79 receiving yards. Tyreek is going to go higher than 63.5. If y'all wanted to go check out these picks, you can on Underdog Fantasy. You can find the link in the description, in the comment section, in the live chat. Promo code FLOCK, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll get a free Jordan Love pick, more than less than half a total yard for the game on Thanksgiving. And on top of that, you'll be getting a free team review on flockfantasy.com on the live stream that we're doing every single day. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog Fantasy. But we have Hill, Pickens, 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 Hill, Pickens, Pickens. So it sounds like most people are on George Pickens. The projections are on George Pickens. I'm not going to fault you at all if you wanted to go in that direction. Now, JB coming out with a start sit question here says, this is We need to choose a tight end and we need a flex. I'm going to be going with Hawkinson over K-Dodd. And I think TJ Hawkinson, you get the massive progression in snaps this past week, which was really encouraging. And then down in the flex spot, we're going to go ahead. We're going to take Mike Evans, where Evans didn't play a bunch this past week against the Giants, but I think it was more so game script dependent, and he should be in a much better spot going into the future. Now, Troy Hayes coming out with a free Underdog team review. Really do appreciate you, my guy. Excited to check this out. And again, I want to reiterate, if y'all wanted one of those free team reviews, the link will be in that comment section or description where it says free team review. And just go through that Underdog process. But anyway, Troy says, hey, Mason, love the streams. Keep up the great work. Currently sitting at 6-5 and in 6th place. Should be 7-5 after this week if Lad puts up 1 point tonight. Love to hear it. Wonder if there are any moves you think we should make. So the team is Jamad, bro. We are the second team in the league analyzer. We have, pretty much a lead over the rest of the league. It's like these two teams, and then everybody else is about even. We are 7-5. The team at number 1 in the league analyzer is 11-1. And actually, I apologize. Ignore the league analyzer. It's pulling in 1 quarterback rankings, and this is a super flex league. So definitely going to be a difference between how it's ranking these teams and how I would personally. But anyway, this is a super flex league where I believe you're only starting 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. So quarterback is going to make up a very high percentage of your starting lineup output weekly. I don't think your trade deadline's passed. At least you didn't say it did. I'll definitely talk about any of the moves that we would make when it comes to waiver wire pivots, as well as anything that we would have with trades. So in general, in a league where you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, and it's a super flex league, just from a percentage perspective, you are going to have a very, very high percentage of your starting lineup output coming every single week from the quarterback position. I play in a bunch of super flex leagues, pretty much only dynasty super flex leagues, to be honest. But in the vast majority of them, you start up to 10 or 11 offensive players. Like you have 3 wide receivers, 2 flex spots, and a super flex. Where their quarterbacks are still very important, but when you can get that many wide receivers into your starting lineup weekly, quarterback is going to be less important in general. Whereas here, when you're only starting 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, if you have elite quarterback output, it is going to be very difficult for your league mates to catch up. So if we had the ability to go out there and sell a depth piece and a 2-for-1 deal to go get an improvement at the quarterback position, I would love to. Right now we have Stroud, Stafford, A-Rich that we can kind of just cycle through and play with the matchups between. Hopefully Stroud's better in the future. Obviously Stroud's been arguably the worst fantasy football quarterback for his cost this season. And Anthony Richardson right there giving him a run for his money. But, you've had a couple better games from A-Rich this year than what we've seen from Stroud. A-Rich has at least given us a game close to 30 fantasy points. But regardless, quarterback is kind of a debacle here. So I'd love to upgrade it, but realistically speaking, how can we? We go over to running back. We have 2 locked and loaded RB1s. Absolutely love to see it with both Achane and Brees. But no expendable assets here that people will pay up for. Like, I like Roshan. Clearly, if you were to have an injury to DeAndre Swift, at least in my mind, I don't know, Roshan turns into a must-start running back every single week, which I'd be very excited about. But is anybody trading for him? No. Amir Abdullah, we saw that he was actually able to have a pretty damn good game this past week with both Raiders running backs injured, but now it seems like Alexander Madison may be healthy again. No, there's no way in hell anybody's trading for Amir Abdullah at this point. Going over to wide receiver, we have 2 locked and loaded wide receiver 1s with Jamar Chase and Mike Evans. Our wide receiver 3, Ladd McConkey, is realistically hitting our flex spot. You sell any of these guys, they're pieces that come out of your starting lineup and they get replaced with what? Tank Dell? So I'd say, Tank Dell's the expendable asset, but right back to what we have with Roshan Johnson. Is there anybody in the world trading for Tank Dell? No. So realistically speaking, I think you're stuck. In terms of trades, there are none. I don't think that this is a team that there's a single trade that makes sense. The only thing that could make sense in my mind is walking our butt over to the waiver wire. And if we have the Raiders, well, when the Raiders running backs are back, you drop Amir Abdullah, you pick up a different premium handcuff back that's an injury away from making a difference, such as Ray Davis. You potentially just cut Amir Abdullah now, go pick up Keenan Allen. So for me, I think the only thing that I could potentially make an argument for would be to move on from Abdullah, pick up a waiver wire option once you get word that the Raiders options are back in. Again, I would love to go out there and I would love to try to get creative and upgrade at the quarterback position. But I think for the way that our team is set up, we don't really have the expendable assets. This is a shallower format where we want a studs and duds approach. We have a studs and duds approach. Obviously, we want to hold on to the studs. Nobody's going to buy the duds. So I think you're kind of sitting up an absolute prayer that Jamar Chase gets us through the fantasy football playoffs, which this is pretty much the exact same spot of my team, my guy. I am also a 7-5 team that what I have is a hope and a prayer that Jamar Chase gets us through. But I really do appreciate you, and I wish I had more to go through for you. But Scenario says, I like Mike's playoff schedule more, but I don't know. I mean, hell, I'd rather have Mike Evans over Tyreek Hill at this point. Again, I mean, you just had two of his best games that you're ever going to see. And what does Tyreek do? Nothing. So I don't blame you whatsoever for going through and moving off of Tyreek to get to Mike Evans. Like, I don't mind trading for Tyreek. I think Tyreek can be a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 at this point. But I definitely need to be charging a premium if we're going to do it. Now, Money Mike coming out saying this is a super flex league. We have Hurts and Kyler. Wide receivers are Garrett, Devonta Smith, Elijah Moore, and Rome Odunze. If this is a super flex league, I would just rather hold on to Tua. I kind of understand the thought process here that, oh, Josh Downs is out. Maybe Michael Pittman is viable. And again, I would say that this is a team that probably needs a little more help at wide receiver than it would running back. I would hold on to Tua as a quarterback 3 here personally. Even if you never plan on starting him over one of these other two guys, if you were to sell him in a super flex format, I definitely would be charging more of a premium. Like, I'd rather package together Tua and Rome Odunze and try to get to a higher tier wide receiver if you were going to be making this move. I mean, I completely understand where you come from because definitely it's a team that could use a receiver more than a quarterback. Now, BZ Young coming out says we have Kittle, Cook. We have Kittle. Cook would be in the flex. Okay. Yeah, if you have Kittle, you're never starting David Njoku regardless. Jaden Reed does look a little more interesting now that you have the injury to Rome Odunze. I'm sorry, not Rome Odunze, to Romeo Dobbs. But it's not like Dobbs going to be out rest of season here. I mean, Dobbs is possibly going to be out for a week or two. So I would just go ahead. I would take James Cook, locked and loaded RB1 rest of season. I think it's a really, really smart deal if you have Kittle. And I could see how it possibly could help the other team. Bertrand, always happy to see us, says we have Kyron and CMC at running back. Higgins' health is a question mark. I mean, Higgins is healthy now. If we have Kyron and CMC at running back, let's go through and look at this. This is a 10-team league where we can start up to 4 receivers weekly. Our starting lineup afterwards would be Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Kyron, CMC, and then maybe like Brian Robinson in the second flex. Because it's a 10-team league, I think you can make this move. I would be a lot more excited about it if it was a league where you started 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, so the depth was less important. Because I do want to be on record, it does look like it's not the craziest thing to say that T. Higgins can be a wide receiver 1 rest of season. That Isaiah Pacheco can be an RB1 rest of season. But I'm pretty damn confident A.J. Brown's an elite option. Not only does A.J. Brown project out to be an elite option, but at the same time, you are looking at a really tough playoff schedule for Isaiah Pacheco. I'm probably not making this move, though, because I'm worried about T. Higgins' health. But let me go ahead and refresh this and get some more questions coming in. J Dollar Sign, always happy to see you, my friend. Here says, bench Waddle and lost by 10. I still have a good shot at the playoffs. With help from other matchups, any last-minute trade ideas to address the RB2 hole? Specifically, but not limited to Jerry's 13th reason, who is willing to take Hunt or sell Pacheco. Is it safe to roll with Taysom rest of season? Thanks a ton. Thank you for sticking with me for so long, my God. Let me hook you up with both a free trade question and a free start set question. So again, obviously we're operating under the assumption here we are not through the trade deadline, which it sounds like we are good on that front. And I do not blame you whatsoever for benching Waddle. I actually played Waddle with my own team this week. Still did not save me. I'll say that much. And the only reason I played the dude is because I had no other choice. I had Devonta Smith injured and Jamar Chase on bye. But yeah, it was his first. He hadn't had a double-digit point performance since week 1. So I think you were right to bench him. Obviously, hindsight is 2020. But we are Garrett Fidical here. And we are near the bottom of the league analyzers. Not in a great spot. I mean, we are 6-6 though, which is fine. And honestly, where we can maybe be saved here is the fact that there are some pretty decent options sitting out there on the waiver wire. So I think the first thing that we want to look at before we come up with any potential trades or even really assess what we have when it comes to positional strengths and weaknesses is easy waiver wire pivots. It is very easy for us to cut Drake May now that Joe Burrow's through the bye and we're going to be playing Burrow every single week. It is very easy to cut Isaiah Likely. Likely looks like he has no impact for us rest of season. You would not start this dude over Taysom Hill regardless of what you think about Taysom. So what I would be looking to do at this point is cut the backup quarterback, cut the backup tight ends. With Taysom, I think you have, obviously a lot of volatility here. The saving grace is there are just no wide receivers left in this offense. Not only are there no receivers, but also outside of Kamara, there are no running backs. So it does really look like the Saints have no other option but to heavily involve Taysom Hill through the rest of the way. So for me, yeah, I probably would feel comfortable starting Taysom. But if we open up a roster spot by cutting Isaiah Likely and you can pick up Kyle Pitts, then at that point, honestly, I would feel very comfortable with the tight end position, having both the combo of Taysom and playing Pitts. Taysom and Pitts and playing them based off who has the hot hand and who has the better matchup and better projection. And then with that second open roster spot that we have by cutting Drake May, priority number 1 is us picking up Nick Chubb just for free here, which will help us a ton because the main issue that this team has is once Pacheco is fully healthy, Kareem Hunt's a 0. And at the same time, once you have the guys healthy in Las Vegas, Amir Abdullah is a 0 as well. So we're about to have no other running back. So plan A is we cut Drake May and we go get Nick Chubb. Then beyond that, we also cut, likely, you pick up Pitts. I think based off practice reports, I would be fine for also cutting Amir Abdullah to go through and to pick up Travis Etienne. And then if we're looking at this team, the issue is I don't know if we're going to be able to get both Chubb and Etienne off the waiver wire. I don't know how active our league mates are on waivers. But hypothetically, if you look at this team where we have Burrow at quarterback, we're solid. Running back, we have Brees, Nick Chubb, Travis Etienne, and Kareem Hunt. We can get by. We have the elite level RB. We have a couple depth options. Wide receiver, we have Garrett Wilson. Don't love to have Wilson as my wide receiver 1, but it is what it is. We have Harrison. Don't love to have Harrison as my wide receiver 2, but it is what it is. We have Reed. Happier about Reed as my wide receiver 3 than wide receiver 4. And then we have good depth at wide receiver. We have Waddle. We have Rome. We have Pittman. And then at tight end, we would potentially have Taysom and Pitts. So I don't want to sit here and act like, oh, this is the strongest team I've ever seen. Obviously, I'd be lying to you. But I think if you make those small waiver wire adjustments, the team will be much, much better. And then if we were looking at making any other moves beyond that, I mean, if you could sell Kareem Hunt to the team that has Isaiah Pacheco, I would love to do so. Like, let's go through and let's check that out. You were saying that they wanted Kareem Hunt. It looks like another thing that we can see here is they really don't have the wide receiver depth. Their wide receiver 1-2 combo is T. Higgins, Malik Neighbors, which is fine. But their wide receivers 3 and 4 are Cedric Tillman and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So they are pretty limited with the depth that they have at the wide receiver position. And we have plenty of depth at receiver. So maybe if you wanted to send, say, Jalen Waddle and Kareem Hunt and see if you could pivot over and get back a running back that maybe in a crappy offense, but has a 3-down workload such as Tony Pollard, I think that is something that you could do at the very minimum to go through and to solve our running back room. And we're kind of chilling at wide receiver regardless, especially with Pittman potentially getting a bump, knowing that we have the injury to Josh Downs. So I think that would be the trade that makes sense for this roster. I don't really see many trades making sense. But really what's going to fix this team in my mind is all the waiver wire moves that we did talk about. But again, I looked you up with a free start set question and a free trade question as well. So if there is anything else that you have for me, don't hesitate to send it over my way. I'd be super happy to check it out for you, my guy. But let's move this over to our next question. Always happy to see ya. Mother Flocka says, making the playoffs comes down to this pick. Need you, Mason, and the flock. Are we going to go Zay or Lad? Thanks for all you do. If this was right before the game, my guy, I am sorry that we missed this. Let me hook you up with some free start set questions and trade questions. I am sorry, my guy. Obviously, I do not know who we ended up going with. I mean, to be frank, you end up with the 14.5 points from Lad. You end up with the 11.5 points from Flowers. If you looked at my rankings this week, we did have Lad ahead of Flowers. But I'm sorry, my guy. Dumb and forgot decision change from up 19 points. And opponent had Herbert and Quentin Johnston. So he probably ended up winning regardless. Yeah, so it looks like we won regardless, which really happy to hear. Again, I already sent over a free start set question and a free trade question. Let me get you another free start set question for this week, my guy. Feel really bad about that, but happy to hear it sounds like we should have won. So maybe we do need that trade question. I mean, that start set question for this week. But Jake coming out says 8-4, started Dobbs and Boutte. Oh, dear, what were you thinking, my guy? Need help. Is this a smart move? Khalil Herbert is an absolute zero. No, you want Dave Montgomery over JSN. I mean, obviously, if Montgomery was going to miss a considerable amount of time, then sure, you could make this pivot. But reports now are saying Montgomery is going to be good to go. Reports now are saying that you don't need to worry about Montgomery here. Now, Sam Orlando says, want to do it, but worries me about the future. I'm number 1 in the league rankings. So going from London to CeeDee Lamb, downgrade in the short term. I think I'd still rather have Lamb in Dynasty, but they are relatively close. So we upgraded the long term, downgrade in the short term. Brian Thomas, Tuesday Flowers, we upgrade in the short term, downgrade in the long term. Adonai Mitchell is effectively a 0 for me, even in Dynasty, to be honest. And we're trading a second and a third for Cooper Kupp. If you're a contending team, I'm completely fine trading the second and the third for Kupp. For me, I think this is a fine trade. If you wanted a more, I always hate these massive deals, whether it's redraft or Dynasty, to be honest with you. Like, I would rather simplify it. Say if we are a contending team and you were trying to go through and you were trying to make a pivot to win now, I would rather just maybe a simple move is trading AD Mitchell and the second and third for Kupp. And obviously this is a Dynasty league for anybody wondering, but for me, my style always in terms of Dynasty trades is trying to stick with more of this simple, hey, I'll give you these few assets. Here's some long-term value. Give me the short-term guy that's going to produce. Now, Stinky Nerd, funny name, says, don't think I ever start Evans in the playoffs. Okay, so for everybody looking at this, this is a very unique situation. This is a loaded team in an 8-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format. So if you were in a 12-team league, I would say no, you want to go ahead. You want to have Mike Evans and Tracy. Hell, I have Evans ranked straight up over Josh Allen. But in an 8-team league where you can very easily afford to give up the wide receiver and afford to give up the running back, then yes, I think it's completely fine for you to go out there and quote unquote overpay to get the true elite level QB here. Now, Brazy coming out with our next question. Here, wide receiver, obviously Puka is just the auto starts every single week, regardless of what the matchup is. Going down to running backs, Chase Brown's going to see 75+% of the snaps in what should be one of the best offenses in the league. And then going down to look at what we have with the second flex spot, you're looking at really, I don't know, Drake London versus Chuba Hubbard. For me personally, I am going to go ahead. I will take London here. Obviously, though, with Hubbard, I 100% need to give him his flowers. I was worried that Jonathan Brooks may come in and Jonathan Brooks may take work on third down. And Hubbard plays a career-high amount of snaps last week against the Kansas City Chiefs. So Hubbard is a straight-up 3-down workhorse. Now, the difference between him and Chase Brown, though, is obviously Brown's in a phenomenal offense. Now, going over to Rick No Morty with our next question here. We need a flex between Bucky and a great matchup against Carolina. Neighbors, who obviously horrible offense but guaranteed target volume, and not considering Hopkins or Waddle here. I will go with Malik Neighbors. Obviously, Bucky Irving dramatically outscored him last week, so I know everybody is going to want us to be going with Bucky over Neighbors at this point. But with that being said, you had 4 rushing touchdowns in Tampa this past week. Bucky gets 1 of them. So realistically speaking, if we see the rushing production come down, if we see more Baker dropbacks, Rachaad White still has a role. Sean Tucker vultured a rushing touchdown at the very beginning of the game. It's not like Bucky is seeing every single touch in this backfield, even if, obviously, Bucky is pretty damn exciting at this point. Now, Yinser coming out with a question. Here at wide receiver, we go Evans and Higgins. George Pickens is obviously right there. I'd rather have Pickens over Ladd and Metcalf. Just depends who we have at running back. I'm going to go Kenneth Walker in the flex. That's an easy call. What's easy here is you start Evans for sure. You start Kenneth Walker for sure. T. Higgins versus George Pickens is very close. Obviously, they play each other. It should be a high-scoring game environment. At least you have a higher over-under than most Pittsburgh games. Now, with that being said, of course, I don't know. Outside of the first week this season, where obviously you had Higgins working himself back from injury, T. Higgins is averaging about 20 points per game if you remove that 1 week. You have multiple games with near 30 points where we really haven't seen the same ceiling from Pickens. But again, obviously it's a better matchup that you have for Pickens than it is Higgins. You do have the Bengals favored by 3 points in this Pittsburgh contest, if that matters for you. Snubs coming out says, if I win them in, not considering quarterbacks for the flex, not sure why they show up there. Okay, they're not showing up there for me. But anyway, we're looking at A-Rich versus Herbert. This is the first week where you actually have Anthony Richardson and the Colts favored. I mean, first week in a long time. I still go Herbert. And going up against the Atlanta Falcons, obviously I want to reiterate, you don't have a lot of passing volume in this Chargers offense. So again, this is not a spot where Herbert's ever just an absolute must-start quarterback for me. Love the guy from a real-life talent perspective, but obviously we got to separate real life and fantasy. But I like the matchup against Atlanta. It should be a higher scoring game. Going over to what we have in the flex spots, not considering the tight ends, I think you have to play Wilson. Tight end, I have both Kincaid and Sam Laporta with my own team. And if Kincaid's good to go, I'll play Kincaid. Obviously, I don't know if he's playing yet, though. I'm going to go Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's been horrible over the past 2 weeks. Not only has he been horrible, but you also do have pretty low projections for this Jets offense. So I wouldn't fault you at all if you wanted to avoid Wilson. And then going over to the second flex spot, you have the guaranteed touches with Tracy and a garbage offense. You have boom bust upside with Waddle and Addison. I'm going to go with the guaranteed volume with Tracy. Obviously, y'all know I'm not a big Tracy guy, though, primarily because how bad this offense is and the limited usage as a receiver. Now, Dave coming out with a massive dono. Thank you so much, my guy. Let me hook you up with a free start set question just in case you have something you want to send really at any time. But it says, what's up, Mason? Currently 9-3. Unsure what to do about Dobbins. Anyone specific I should be targeting for waivers or lineup? Much love, brother. Much love, my guy. I really do appreciate you. So here we have no Dobbins. If you were looking at waiver wire moves, obviously just a very easy pivot is going out there and picking up Gus Edwards for free. The reality is Gus Edwards probably doesn't hit your starting lineup regardless because you will have the lack of receiving usage. He'll effectively be in a committee with Vidal. So it's a very well-balanced team. Obviously, it's hard for me to know if we're switching anybody in the starting lineup without being able to see the bench here. It seems like there's not much to do. Obviously, I'd rather have a better tight end if possible, but it's probably harder to make moves now that you have the Dobbins injury. But you're in a position to overcome. I did hook you up with a free start set question if you wanted to link your team. That way I could see your bench, or if you want to put your bench options underneath so I could see if I was going to change the starting lineup around in any way, my guy. But JB Terrell coming out with a question here. Wide receiver, we're looking at DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, Harrison, DeAndre Hopkins. Not considering Tillman out of this list, to be honest. Dear God. Flex. Are we looking at these same receivers? Flex. I think you go Tony Pollard if you have no Tajee Spears. If Spears does play, then I think you could pivot off him if need be. Right now, if you were looking at my wide receiver ranks, I do have these guys in a very similar range. I have Harrison at 22, Hopkins at 24, DJ Moore at 32. DJ Moore only had 7 targets this week, comparison to Keenan at 15 and Rome Odunze at 10. And Calvin Ridley at 28. So I have Ridley, Hopkins, Harrison, all within 6 spots of each other. Harrison, I think you actually end up seeing a bunch of Kyler dropbacks and pass attempts as much as it hurts me, where I need it to be a big James Conner game. The matchup against Minnesota, I think, is better for the receivers. And then I think you go with Hopkins. You do currently have the Kansas City Chiefs projected to score the 3rd most points in the NFL this week, according to sportsbooks. Now, Alex, coming out with their next question, says, pronounced as Beerline. Thanks, bro. Much love, my guy, Alex Beerline. Don't know who we have a quarterback, but the flex, I honestly think if he is good to go, you just go ahead and you jam in Isaiah Pacheco. It's the largest spread in the NFL this week, and it's not really close. Between KC and the Raiders, I believe there is a 2-touchdown spread. It's like 13 points. So it's a completely fine spot to go with Pacheco. He's been practicing in full. Obviously, we want to get that confirmation that he is going to be good to go. If he does miss, I think the guy you pivot over to is Devontae Adams. But if I had Pacheco on my team, I wouldn't stress to play him his first week back. His thing is, he probably could have came back last week. And I'm assuming just the Chiefs figured, oh, we're playing the Panthers. We don't need him. Because he's been practicing in full for weeks now at this point. Now, going over to our next question. We are looking at Alex Beerline's other team. We need a running back between Jones, Connor, Tracy, Pacheco, Montgomery. The Lions are like 10-point favorites here over the Bears. I think they're able to run the ball consistently. Montgomery did get in a limited practice today as well, so I think we assume that Montgomery is going to be good to go. Going over to tight ends, we're looking at Laporta, Cade Otton, and Taysom Hill. For me, I would probably play Taysom. You actually have a pretty decent projection with this Taysom Hill offense. And at the same time, I don't know who else you go to here. They don't trust any running back not named Alvin Kamara. You have no other wide receivers. And then going over to the flex, for me, I would prefer going with one of the running backs over Tyreek. Like Aaron Jones, you're in a game in which the Vikings are favored. It's a good matchup against Arizona. You have the receiving workload. You had 26 opportunities last week, and it looks like you were 100% back from this injury. And I see EE asking why we had no waiver wire video today. We talked about this at the very beginning, but I am sorry for no waiver wire video today. Is there anybody interesting on the waiver wire this week? Just let me know, ladies and gentlemen, who are you excited about on the waiver wire? We got a wide receiver 2 in Denver. Are you really putting this guy into your starting lineup now that we're through the bye weeks? McNichols, yes, Jeremy McNichols is viable if both Eckler and Brian Robinson are both out. And then Gus Edwards, who we talked about last night in the live stream. And we got, I'm assuming, Zach out here. Because I think last time we saw Badaki was from the other account, saying waivers suck. Yeah, the waiver wire sucked so bad this week. I decided, you know what? No waiver wire video. What's the point? It would be different if like this was the waiver wire slate last week in week 12 when there were a bunch of buys. So it's like, yeah, I understand. People need options off waivers. This week, it's like, okay, everybody has no bye weeks. Really, who are you looking at? Which has been the case for the couple weeks. Like week 12 was garbage, week 11 was garbage. But again, the reason we made them is because, there are a bunch of teams on bye, so you probably actually have to look at someone. Now, PPAV coming out with a start sit question. Appreciate you, my guy. Says, White versus Pollard in the flex. I am going to go ahead. I'm going to take Pollard. Obviously, Bucky Irving appears to have taken the job from White. White sees a season low with his snap rate this past week. I think Jaden Reed is interesting as well, given the injury we have with Romeo Dobbs. Worried I made a massive mistake trading Bucky for White on Saturday. Thank you. It looks to be that case. If we're just going to be completely honest. I mean, on Saturday, the baseline assumption was, okay, Rachaad White's had the role all year. Rachaad White's been less efficient than Bucky, but they haven't made the transition yet. And then obviously you see the transition made on Sunday and you just have to react and you have to update it. But yeah, I think you go Pollard, and obviously we are hoping that you have no Spears. And if you have no Spears, I mean, Pollard should crush, and it's very easily Pollard in that instance. But let me go ahead and refresh this. And Zach says, probably the worst waiver wire year or of any year I can remember. And it will be interesting to see what Bucky and White look like in a neutral game script. Yeah, my thing with Bucky is I already know that a bunch of people are going to be screaming at us for, quote-unquote, having Bucky too low in our rankings this week. But I'm just trying to be realistic. Where you had 4 rushing touchdowns for the Bucs against the Giants. So it's like, obviously I'm excited about Bucky. I think we rank Bucky as like a low-end RB2 in our rest of season ranks. But it's still very much a running back by committee. And it's not like you're going to see 4 rushing touchdowns in Tampa every week into the future. And that Sean Tucker rushing touchdown was at the beginning of the game, too. It's not like that was garbage time. PJ Nasty says, look at the Bucs implied team total. Yeah, the Bucs do project out to be a borderline top 5 offense in the NFL this week. You have a phenomenal matchup against the Carolina Panthers. So I actually did rank Bucky higher in my rankings this week than I have him in my rest of season ranks. And Zach has him at RB8. I think RB18 is fine. Adishi coming out says, I'm 6-6 and in 6th place. Higgins' nagging injuries scare me, but scary Terry on bye is also a concern. What would you do? Love the content. Really do appreciate you, my guy. Of course, thank you so much for stopping in. And let me hook you up with a free trade question, just in case maybe you have a different counter or something along the lines that you wanted to send over. But Chubb to Dowdle, I do think is a slight down. Honestly, I don't even know if it's a downgrade. Dowdle, you have more receiving usage. If you look at the projections this week, you actually have a higher implied team total with the Cowboys than you do with the Browns. Now, of course, a lot of that is matchup oriented, where you do have Jameis in a really tough environment this week playing Denver. I would rather have Higgins straight up over Terry McLaurin. A big reason for this is, yes, you get an extra game from T. Higgins. If you are currently 6-6 in 6th place, we need a win in week 14, right? We can't afford to just go. Maybe Terry McLaurin has more points per game when we get to the fantasy football playoffs. That's not as big of a deal for us as let's get to the fantasy football playoffs. Let's take the receiver that is actually going to be playing. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I think I go ahead. I think we take the T. Higgins side. Now, Matthew coming through with our next question says, trying to get the last spot in the playoffs and need a win. Any advice is appreciated. Okay. Baker, Jordan Love this week is pretty tough. You do have a 25-point total for the Packers, 26-point total for the Bucks. If you had Godwin good to go, I'm for sure taking Baker over Love. I have them ranked back-to-back in my rankings this week. I think it's up to you. We'll go Jordan Love for now, but we may end up changing that. I'm going over to running back. I have Hubbard at 19 and James Conner at 20 in my rankings this week. I think you go Chuba. I was expecting that Jonathan Brooks was going to have the receiving role this past week, or at least a role on third down given his pass protection ability. And clearly that just was not the case at all. Hubbard is the true 3-down bell cow. Between Kincaid and Dallas Goedert, it's very tough to know right now. If you have no Devonta Smith, I think you go Goddard. if Smith plays as well as Kincaid being healthy, then at that point, I think you could pivot over to Kincaid. And then going down to the flex, instead of one of the receivers, I'm going to take the 3-down running back and James Conner. I have Conner. I'm very worried about the matchup. I'm worried about the other running backs expanding their roles here just a bit as well. So am I in love with it? No, but I'm stuck with it. So at least Conner saved the day over the past 2 weeks with the receiving usage. Now, Eli Davis coming out with the start set question. Here we need a flex. We are looking at Higgins as a must-start option. I guess I'd probably go Tyreek over Higgins. You do have a tough matchup for effectively both receivers here. You've had the Tua blow-ups over the past 2 weeks, and even in those instances, you still had Tyreek disappointing with Achane and Jonnu taking the vast majority of the production in this offense. So obviously that is very frustrating. But I don't know. Is still a wide receiver that's had pretty much double-digit fantasy points in every game that Tua has played in full so far this season. Obviously, we haven't had the 30-point Tyreek performances that we've looked for. The ceiling has been extremely low. But, I mean, to be fair, when we're looking at Tyreek Hill, I'm not saying like, oh, yeah, we're super excited to get Tyreek Hill as our wide receiver one. It's like, oh, okay, I guess I'll play him in our flex, you know. So even if he's been super disappointing, I still think you play him there. Now, Pedro coming out with our next question says, 7-5 must win to clinch the playoffs. We need some of the start sit help. Okay. Looking at this wide receiver between Ridley, Zay Flowers, I think we go with Flowers just in a much better offense. Tight end, I'm going to be going Kelsey, and we are going to assume that maybe Noah Gray does just take a small step backwards here. And then down in the flex spot, F it. If it's a full PPR format, I'm going to go Calvin Ridley over Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre's in a good matchup, and this is the best we've seen the Patriots project out all season with an implied team total of 20 points. But Ramondre just has such a low floor. Now, Mello BR coming out with our next question here. For the flex, we are choosing between Bucky, Pacheco, White, Devontae Adams, and Garrett Wilson. For me, if we get early clarity that Pacheco's good to go with no limitations, then I think you go with Isaiah Pacheco, with the Chiefs being 2 touchdown favorites over the Raiders. Now, of course, with that being said, if they tell us, oh, Pacheco's going to be good to go, but he'll be on a snap count, we'll have some type of limitation, Kareem Hunt will be worked in heavily, then at that point, I think the option that you pivot over to is Garrett Wilson. But specifically, if they tell us that Pacheco's 100%, given the matchup in the game environment, I really think he's in a good spot. Now, J-Dog says, must win, don't know about 2 Giants, please help. Quarterback, I mean, if Purdy ends up playing, I think you can go with him, and we'll see how the projections change throughout the week for the Niners. But for how things look, you are in a spot where the Bills are favored by 7 points. You have an implied team total of 19 points for the Niners right now. So I'm assuming that we have no Brock Purdy. Like for me, I had to pick up Matthew Stafford in the flock league to play with Purdy missing this past week. I think I'm probably stuck playing Stafford again. Going down to the flex spots, obviously out of this grouping, Chuba is just going to be an absolute must-start running back. Brooks had no role whatsoever this past week. Going down to the flex, it's really between Tracy, Debo, Waddle. You have no Downs, you have no Olave. You got to go Tracy. It sucks. I agree with you. The last thing we ever want is 2 Giants in with either DeVito or Locke at quarterback. I don't know. But what? Can I tell you to go Deebo Samuel with no Brock Purdy? Can we go with Jalen Waddle with 2 games this season with double-digit fantasy points? Probably not. So I don't think you have another option but to play 2 Giants here. Now, CM98 says, my wide receivers are Puka, Reed, Shakir, Waddle. Running backs are Chuba, Hall, Achane. Any trade recommendations? We need a wide receiver. I mean, if you wanted to do a 2-for-1 tier up, trading Waddle and Shakir to go try to get an upgrade, you can. Obviously, nobody's going to be trading for Reed or Harrison at this point. And honestly, even though we've been a big sell high on Jaden Reed guy this season, to be fair, he actually may be in a better spot with the Romeo Dobbs concussion. So I think if you were looking to sell 2 of these guys, one is Jalen Waddle, where you probably don't see that type of passing volume and efficiency from Tua rest of season. And also, again, with Waddle, it's his 2nd game this year with double-digit fantasy points. And then the other guy that you more likely than not are going to look to sell would be Shakir, where Shakir sets a career-high 12 targets back in Week 11, but it's in an environment in where you have no Keon Coleman and no Dalton Kincaid. And as you get both these players back in this offense, regardless of what you think the order of these players will be in the target totem pole, we can all agree that Shakir will have a smaller piece of the pie than he did previously. So yeah, if you wanted to get an upgrade at wide receiver, I think that the clear move is a 2-for-1 consolidating move, especially as now that we're through the bye weeks, by trying to send Waddle and Shakir to go get an upgrade that way. Now, K-Baked with our next question says, I survived the Burrow Chase bye weeks. Thanks, King. Well, my guy, 1, I appreciate you sticking with us for too long. And 2, freaking, you're the only, I didn't survive the Chase bye. So I'm screwed. K-Dot and Jonnu Smith, obviously Jonnu's been so much better, but if you look at the difference in the projections with the offenses this week, you actually do have much better projections when you were looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as opposed to the Miami Dolphins, where over the past 2 weeks, Miami has projected out to be a top 5 offense. This week, they project out to be a middle of the road or slightly below average against the Packers in Green Bay. Whereas you actually have the Bucs projecting out to be a top 5 offense. So I think I go K-Dot in there. And then going down to the flex, I'm assuming we have no Josh Downs, so we are going to go ahead. We're going to take Jerry Jeudy. Obviously, it's a tough matchup for Jeudy. And again, if you actually look at the target volume that you've had here in Cleveland, they actually have used a lot of Elijah Moore. They've used a lot of Cedric Tillman. So, I mean, the targets are being spread out here quite a bit. Now, Nick coming through with our next question says, we do have an open spot in our league. Was wondering if we should make a trade for an elite running back. Trade deadline is tomorrow. Okay, so we got to be cooking something up real quick. Can I hear in the live chat real quick, just a yes or no question? Has your trade deadline passed? Yes or no, has your trade deadline passed? But real quick, Nick, let me give you a free trade question and a free start set question, just in case there's anything that comes in last minute that you want to send my way. But we got yes, no, no, yes, 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 yes. Yes, tomorrow, no. Friday, yes, no, no. Okay, so it looks like maybe most people are yes or... Okay, it looks like most people are trade deadlines tomorrow. Okay. I maybe need to be making a trade tomorrow. I may try to cook something up in the Flock League just for the funsies. But anyway, real quick, this is CTE. And this is the #1 team in the League Analyzer. And it's not even remotely close. We are 7-5, but in terms of value rest of season, we are in a really, really good spot here. Starting off with the quarterback position, we are currently rolling with Kyler Murray. Obviously, Kyler disappointing this past week. Kyler has been a little bit up and down, but you do have the rushing upside with Kyler Murray. So I still do view him a tier ahead of the streaming quarterbacks for sure. It is a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league. So I would love to have like a true elite level quarterback if we could go out there and get one. And honestly, I know how we can very easily do this, because you go over to running back, and this is why we have the best team in the league. You're sitting with CMC, Chase Brown, Kenneth Walker, Brian Robinson, Bucky Irving, Jordan Mason, Trey Benson. We have the elite running backs at the top. Not only do you have the elite running backs at the top, but at the same time, we have plenty of depth as well. There's no way in hell that you are going to be able to get Bucky Irving inside your starting lineup. Bucky Irving is a running back a lot of people are excited about, and Bucky Irving is trending in the right direction. What this team needs to do ASAP is we need to go through and send Bucky Irving in a 2-for-1 deal with Kyler Murray to go out and see if we are able to get an upgrade. Now, obviously, the easy way to do this is, 1, we can look for the teams with the best quarterbacks. 2, we can look for the teams that have maybe a hole at running back, or hopefully some combination of both. So this, okay, come on. Please tell me we got a team with an elite quarterback with bad running backs. This team has Josh Allen, Kirk Cousins, Drake May, and then their RB3 is Travis Etienne. Obviously, it is an absolute no-brainer. If somehow, some way, you could send them Bucky Irving and Kyler Murray to get to Josh Allen, we would. That would be my initial offer. If they don't want that, I'd send them Brian Robinson and Kyler Murray to get to Josh Allen. If they don't want that, hell, I don't know if we can do Kenneth Walker and Kyler. Let's see if there's another team. Going over and looking at this team. This team has Nick Chubb as their RB2, Devin Singletary as their RB3. They're sitting with Lamar Jackson, Anthony Richardson. They're 5-7. If they know what they're doing here, they realize, hey, I'm 5-7. I need to win the next 2 weeks, or I absolutely have no shot to get anywhere. Lamar Jackson has a bye week in week 14. They need a running back to start. Is there any world where we can send them Kyler Murray and Bucky Irving to get to Lamar Jackson? And hell, right now their wide receiver 3 is Xavier Worthy. I mean, if you want to throw him Keon Coleman, throw him a bone there, sure, go for it. And obviously, I mean, if they would rather have a receiver, hell, give them Garrett Wilson and Kyler Murray and go get Josh Allen. Doesn't matter. I'm just assuming that obviously Bucky's been so good that people are excited about Bucky and will be willing to trade for him in particular at this point. Where's the team with Jalen Hurts? The team that has Hurts also has Mahomes. Their wide receiver 3 is Shakir. Like, if there's a world where we can send them Garrett Wilson and Kyler Murray to get to Jalen Hurts, an absolute no-brainer, right? As we go over and we look at the rest of the team, realistically, what the hell am I supposed to say when we look at the running back position and the wide receiver position here? We are elite at both. We have the best running back room in the league. We have the best wide receiver room in the league. We have Trey McBride, who is a cornerstone asset at tight end that you can start every single week with zero hesitation. That's already through the bye week as well. So if we look at what we have here with this squad, you have a phenomenal team. The only thing I think I could potentially say or potentially want to even do here is go through and send one of the depth pieces, whether that's Bucky, whether that's Wilson, with Kyler to go get a true elite level quarterback in a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. But again, thank you so much, my friend. And I hooked you up with that free start sit question and that free trade question as well, just in case maybe you're working on an offer that you want to send my way. Now, Chief Reefer coming out with our next question here. It's a start sit question. We're here down in the flex. We have Pacheco that we can be looking at. We have Neighbors, Ladd, Evans. I'd probably go with Evans if we knew Pacheco was going to see every single touch in this backfield in just an absolute beautiful matchup. You know what? F it. For me, if they told us Pacheco's 100% good to go, I think you could consider Pacheco over Bucky. Right now, the Chiefs project to have the largest spread of any team in the NFL this week with, a pretty much 2 touchdown spread, 14 points, 13 and a half, whatever the hell it is. I really want to get Pacheco in. Like, I feel very confident. I think you could see the spike immediately. But again, I wouldn't fault you whatsoever for going through, waiting a week, because you do have the extremely strong options. And the Bucs offense projects out very nice in a great matchup against Carolina. Now, Gaming Mercer coming through, trading London for Higgins and Etienne. I can't do this. I know at running back, we're maybe sitting here with, no, you have no reason to do this. Why the hell would we? You're never starting Travis Etienne. T. Higgins is clearly Drake London's a better option than T. Higgins. You definitely want Drake London here. For sure, you want Drake London. The thing with Etienne is he could be better if Lawrence is going to come through and play this week. But also, if Tank Bigsby's back, then maybe at that point, you actually do see this turn into a little bit more of a running back by committee. Now, Sriracha Matt coming out says 5-7, 10-team PPR, 3 wide receiver, 2 flex. We have Puka, T, Jawan, Waddle, Hull, Montgomery, Jonnu, Tillman. Is T worth Lamar? Yeah, T is worth Lamar. Actually, no. If you're because the thing is here, specifically for your situation, if you were 8-4, yes, I make this move. If you were 8-4, I think you can go through and you can make an argument. Yes, despite wide receiver depth pieces mattering so much given these league settings, let's go through and let's get Lamar Jackson. Lamar has the most points in fantasy football. Maybe Saquon passed him this past week, but anyway, Lamar's been just printing 20-point weeks every single week for you regardless. The very minimum 20-point weeks. But my hesitation with it is not only do wide receivers matter a ton here, where we can start up to 5 of them weekly, but at the same time, almost more importantly, you're 5-7. So if you're 5-7, essentially to get into the fantasy football playoffs, what are we having to win the next 2 weeks? Like, there's no shot that you can lose and get in. So I think you hold on to Higgins and Baker. Now, Yaxon says, trying to give these guys away, but nobody will trade. Well, wide receiver, London, just an auto starts. And down in the flex, I think he goes CMC. I'm less excited about McCaffrey this week now. 1, it's a tough matchup against Buffalo. And 2, based off sportsbook projections, it is having me think that Shanahan's lying and that Brock Purdy is going to be missing. Which obviously just lower expectations with this offense dramatically. But still, even in that case, McCaffrey has a receiving role. And McCaffrey is going to see 100% of the touches out of his own backfield. So still somebody that you have to play. Lucas, you need to email me, masondodd@flockfantasy.com. Moving this over to our next question from Jay Lucas. Says, based on my team, should I trade Montgomery and JSN for McCaffrey? So right now, wide receiver, it's a league where you only start 2 receivers and 1 flex. We currently have Neighbors, DeAndre Hopkins, Justin Jefferson, DJ Moore. So I know that everybody's going to hate us for saying this with CMC having just the absolute dud performance this past week. Obviously, Montgomery, the best offense in the league. You still have to go CMC here, though. It's a 10-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex where the wide receiver depth doesn't matter much. And even if we're bummed about CMC for this week when you have no Purdy, operating under the assumption that Purdy comes back this season, I will take the bold side of this, and I'll say I'll take CMC. As I don't know if your team really is viewing JSN as an every week starter, specifically with how shallow your league format is. And I would still rather have McCaffrey over Montgomery based off me assuming that we are going to get Purdy back in. Sarah says, if I get a trade question in right now, can you do it tonight? 100%. All questions that are in, we'll look at in the live stream while we're doing them. If you ever send in a question on a live stream, 99.999% of the time it will be answered in that live stream. The only time it wouldn't is if it's like super late, if it's like 1 a.m. and we're still streaming and it's like a free Underdog team review. Then the team review is just because they take a little bit longer. We'll get pushed a bit. But Joy Boy says, playing for last place, do we make this trade? No. Again, I understand that McCaffrey, let's go through and realistically, let's update the rankings on the site. Now that we know that Purdy's injury is going to linger. And where would I realistically put McCaffrey? I'd probably have Achane, Kamara, Bijan, Henry. I think McCaffrey is still a mid RB1. Rest of season. I think that you make an argument. Obviously, if you check out my rankings this week, we'll have like Gibbs ahead of CMC. But for rest of season, like I would still rather have McCaffrey. Once we get Purdy back in. Because like just realistically looking at this, I know we had the bad week with CMC, but at the same time, this is a running back that's oh, I forgot. For a second, I was looking at the wrong team in the Flock League. I was trying to pull up CMC. I know CMC only gives you the 8 fantasy points. You still do get 82% of the snaps in a blowout. In a close game, you are going to see a much higher utilization rate. You're going to be at 94, 88% of the snaps. You're going to be sitting here averaging 5 receptions a game. What's been very disappointing is in 3 games played, you haven't had a touchdown. And obviously, I think you can say that the touchdowns won't be there when Brock Purdy's not in the offense, because what we saw is it is going to be an absolute garbage offense with no Purdy. But for me, like, this isn't remotely close. If Purdy comes back, very easily give me CMC over Tracy, George Pickens, Jonnu Smith. Give me the guy that should have 90+% of the opportunities in his backfield, that has broke fantasy football in the past, has a massive receiving role as well. Ash says, what can I get for CMC, Debo, Jameson, or Montgomery Cook? I have no idea what the... Okay. If you are trying to sell Debo Samuel at this point, like, let's just realistically go through and let's look at these ranks. We do a couple of, when you can do a couple different things. One, the free average expert rankings on the site are always free that you can go ahead and you can pull up. So we can go through and we can look at where Debo Samuel is. And you know what? We can also go through and you can pull up the trade finder as well. You go, oh, okay, I want to see what I can get for Debo Samuel. What can you get for Debo Samuel? We'll only look at 10 and 12 team, half full PPR formats and 1 QB leagues. Somebody traded Debo for Shakir. Somebody traded Debo, Jonnu for Tyreek. Somebody traded Debo for Olave. Debo and Achane for Bo Nix and Ladd McConkey. What the hell are they smoking? Debo for Nick Chubb. And Debo for Tony Pollard. A Debo for Jennings and Waddle. Like, my assumption is if your league mates are in tune, you're not getting anything for Debo Samuel at this point. And then with CMC, I mean, we just talked about it. Rewind 30 seconds if you want to see it. But I don't think now's the time to sell CMC. If anything, if we were still making buy low videos, this would be one of those instances where we go through and we say, oh, buy low on McCaffrey. Everybody goes, oh, you're stupid, blah, blah, blah. And then we look back and go, oh, remember when I told you all to buy low on McCaffrey and he's a running back one with no issues now? And everybody goes, oh, yeah, well, it was obvious. Just like when everybody was panicking about Bijan, when everybody was panicking about Gibbs early in the season. I think it's going to be the same thing here with CMC. Do not panic. The usage is there. The offense is bad with no Purdy. Of course, the offense is bad with a garbage quarterback under center. So, I don't know. You're not getting anything for Debo. I wouldn't sell CMC. And again, if you're going to have a much better time figuring out, oh, what can I get for this player? If you go and just look at the updated rankings or go, this is completely free on flockfantasy.com. Literally just go to the trade calc, put in whatever player you want to look at. If you want to see, oh, what's Dave Montgomery going for right about now? Obviously, some of these deals are just absolutely laughable and you can't ignore them, but you can also look at maybe some valid deals where somebody traded Aaron Jones and Michael Pittman for David Montgomery. That seems realistic, you know? So, yeah, hopefully that helps a bit, but I do want to reiterate, for the love of God, people here, if you got CMC, do not trade him. But Mavium coming out with a massive dono. Thank you so much, my friend. Love the profile pick as well. Let me hook you up with a free start set question. It says 6-point full PBR. Need to drop one. Opponent has Allen, Barkley, HN, Mixon, St. Brown, London. Am I screwed? Bucky and Jonnu on the waiver wire. Bucky is the number one waiver wire priority for you at that point. And if we were looking, okay, this is a super shallow format. So honestly, you are in a phenomenal spot. And we're going to go ahead. We're going to start Derrick Henry, Kenneth Walker. Going down to wide receiver, you start Chase, Jefferson. Tight ends, I would probably start Otten, to be honest. Much better projections with the Bucs offense than the Miami offense this week. And if you have to drop somebody, you drop your backup tight end. Either drop Otten or drop Taysom, and then just keep whoever you want to start. And then going down to the flex, if they told us Pacheco's 100% good to go and you have zero hesitation here, you can go ahead and you can take Isaiah Pacheco. However, if it seems like Pacheco's going to be on a snap counter, they tell us that Kareem Hunt's going to have a role, then at that point, I think the option that you pivot over to is honestly Jonathan Taylor, who is absolute dog water over the past few weeks, has been horrendous. But finally, in a game where the Colts are favored, I think that they should be able to run the ball a bit. Obviously, not super pumped about Taylor, however, given the fact that A-Rich will not check the ball down very often whatsoever. Let me go ahead and refresh this. Okay. So next question coming out from Joe. Here, running back between Montgomery and Taylor, we will go with Montgomery, even if it's a better spot for Taylor this week than last. Tight end, we're going to go with David Njoku. I think just the passing volume that you have in Cleveland is probably hard to get away from. And then half PPR format's close. Half PPR format, I actually probably do go Jonathan Taylor over Evans. Full PPR league, I think we go with Evans instead. I'm really excited about both players this week. You do have really good projections for this Bucs offense, of course. And I think Evans, we get closer to 70, 80% of the snaps as opposed to a week ago where he's closer to 50%. And then looking at Jonathan Taylor again, I want to reiterate that this is a really good matchup. And this is a really good game environment where you do have the Colts actually favored. Now, looking at what we have with our next question. This one coming out from Damien says, should we start to consider Zach Ertz a low-end tight end one rest of season? Does Sutton, then also Sutton or Kareem Hunt in the flex? Very easily Cortland Sutton. If you have Pacheco playing, which I'm kind of assuming Pacheco plays at this point. Now, obviously, if Pacheco were to miss, then at that point, I think you probably do go with Kareem Hunt, given how good the matchup is. And then, yes, I think you could consider Zach Ertz a low-end tight end one rest of season. He's been a tight end one this year. He's had a ton of volume. And obviously, it's a good offense. But the thing is, it's not super bold to say that he can be a low-end tight end one. Because realistically, if you look at like the tight end landscape in fantasy football, you have the big four or the big three. You have McBride, Bowers, Kittle. You have Kelsey kind of in his own tier at 4. Some weeks he wants to be an elite option. Some weeks he wants to be a bum. And then beyond that, you have just a mass flux of all these guys that are like about the same. Like, I really encourage y'all, please do it to yourself. You know, obviously everybody wants to spaz on us when we make a rankings list of 50 players and they disagree with 3 of them. But sit down, especially at tight end, because y'all know I make rankings all day, every day. It's pretty much what we are spending our time doing. Rank the top 15 tight ends for me. And once you get past the top 4 guys, see how difficult it becomes. And what would be an even more fun exercise is go through, and obviously it's kind of late to do in the season now, but I would love for y'all to do this next year, is go ahead and rank the top 15 of any given position or top 24 of any given position, rest of season wise, and update those rankings every single week and see how it changes over time. But tight end is very difficult, where all the tight ends past those top 4 guys, you can make an argument to have like anybody, to be completely honest. So yeah, Zach Ertz has crushed. I think you put Zach Ertz there easily. But Jay calls to say, Mason, what are you thinking? Also, anything else to target with this? It's a 10-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format. Running back, we have Barkley, Chase Brown already through their buys. So, yep, I think you can do this. My only hesitation is, while James Conner does have a pretty tough matchup this week, in general, James Conner does have about the best fantasy football playoff schedule you're going to ask for. So I don't love it for that reason, but obviously this is another instance with like Justin Jefferson, similar to McCaffrey, where maybe people are worried, but again, I don't know. You're going to look back 3 weeks from now and we're going to go, hey, remember when people were worried about Justin Jefferson because he had a bad 3-game stretch? So this is a league format where you want to go out there and you want to just acquire that top end asset, while at the same time, I think Justin Jefferson is that distressed piece that you can afford to get. Now, Jake Grimes coming through says, bench 2 of Kamara, Chase Brown, Walker, Jefferson, Neighbors, Evans, Bucky. We're going to be benching Bucky with him still being in a committee in Tampa, even if he has a great matchup and even if he has been absolutely crushing. And then we are also going to be benching Malik Neighbors, where he's had the consistent target volume, but it is just a horrendous offense. And then with Jordan Love, Baker Mayfield, we answered this question earlier in the live stream. And to be completely honest with you, it is very difficult to answer. I honestly think that it is going to be up to you. For me, I have them ranked back-to-back in my rankings. Right now, I have Jordan Love 1 slot higher. But again, it is a really good matchup for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week going up against the Panthers. But we got Cuban Missile coming out with a free team review. Really appreciate you, my guys. So say, Sup Mason, decent team you've reviewed already. We already know the team is simply amazing. I know I'm just weak at tight end to my quarterback. Any waiver wire moves for the playoffs you'd recommend? As far as viewers go, just listen to the guy. I mean, my team is stacked simply off paying attention. Appreciate any help, brother. Really appreciate you, my guy. And for how much flexing you did with that write-up, I am really happy to hear, or really happy to see that we are the #1 team in the league analyzer here. Looking at this, I definitely remember it because of, actually, no, never mind. This is a profile pick that I think is maybe common on ESPN. We definitely have seen this profile pick before. But it is a league where I'm sure you've already heard me say this. It's a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, where any chance you get to be selling the depth to go out there and get an upgrade inside the starting lineup, we want to do it. And with it being a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex as well, quarterback is going to make up a very high percentage of our starting lineup output weekly. And with quarterback making up that high end percentage, I mean, it would make sense to trade for an elite level quarterback if we could. Because starting off at QB, I mean, we are sitting here effectively streaming the position. I think Drake May is an interesting streamer if he begins to run the ball a little bit more. Obviously, he hasn't been rushing a ton, which is a little bit frustrating, but I'm completely fine with us just rolling with Tua and rolling with Russ, of course. I think it is just kind of up to you on that front. Going over to what we have at running back, we are sitting with 2 locked and loaded RB1s. Obviously, we're 9-3, so we are thinking about the fantasy football playoffs with this squad. And yeah, there I'm going to assume that Brock Purdy will be good to go for the fantasy football playoffs. In that instance, I stand by. I think CMC is a locked and loaded RB1, not much to discuss. We have Dobbins and Bucky Irving, so we do have a little bit of running back depth. In terms of trades, obviously, a lot of it's up in the air until you get word of what the situation is with Dobbins. If they tell us, hey, Dobbins is day-to-day, maybe he misses this week, but it sounds like he'll be for sure good to go in week 14 at the very minimum, then at that point, I actually think if, say, Dobbins was good for the fantasy football playoffs, and we were sitting with 2 elite RBs with Achane and CMC, and then at the same time, you potentially have J.K. Dobbins, Bucky Irving, both as depth pieces. I think with Bucky coming out and just absolutely crushing, and now obviously a matchup against the Carolina Panthers where everybody has their eyes on it and everybody is even more excited than they were previously. I think going ahead and sending Bucky and a quarterback to go get a QB upgrade could be even better, to be honest. But the issue is, I don't want to tell you to go make that move now, because what happens if we get word, oh, we may not see J.K. Dobbins for 3 to 4 weeks? Then at that point, we probably don't have the running back depth where we can afford to make that pivot. Going over to what we have at wide receiver, we have 2 locked and loaded wide receiver 1s with Chase and London. We have JSN as a very solid wide receiver 3/flex play. We have the Josh Downs injury, but we have quality depth with like Shakir. One thing that I'll definitely say from a waiver wire perspective is like MVS is just simply never hitting your lineup, at least for me, with how good our team is. I mean, if you are looking at Marquez Valdez-Scantling, obviously we had we had the first big blow-up game, and then afterwards you do get another long receiving touchdown in the game where Taysom just goes nuclear instead. But realistically speaking here, you don't have any consistent target volume with MVS. So for me, I would much prefer looking at some of these waiver wire options, whether it's a premium handcuff back with Charbonnet or Tyler Algier, where you're an injury away from seeing a massive workload, or whether it's maybe a wide receiver that's getting the consistent target volume, such as Keenan Allen, where I could see an easier path to putting Keenan Allen in my starting lineup than Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So waiver wire wise, I think it's very easy to go through and pivot from MVS to either Charbonnet or Keenan Allen. Tight end, we're rolling with K-Dot and Taysom. If you wanted to pick up Kincaid, you can do it. Honestly, doesn't really make that much of a difference for me. But yeah, trade-wise, I think really the only thing that you could do is trade away Bucky and get the elite level quarterback if we get positive J.K. Dobbins injury news tomorrow. I didn't see anything about Dobbins today. I literally waited as long as I could to make the rankings videos tonight, just because I was looking for some of those injury updates, specifically Dobbins and the Washington backs. And sadly, I just didn't see anything at all. But if we get that positive news, we can afford an elite level quarterback. And then if you pick up that quarterback we're really excited about in that 2-for-1 deal, obviously we'll open up a Ross spot in that way. Backfill with somebody like Charbonnet, and then also you could cut Russ, and then you could pick up another running back like Algier. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. And again, congrats on having the best team in the league, my guy. And yeah, of course, thank you so much for everything. Now, Heifer, a long time member of the flock. Happy to see you. Running back, we have James Cook, Bucky Irving to choose from. Bucky, obviously, great matchup, looks great, but at the same time, again, 4 rushing touchdowns in Tampa this past week. Bucky gets one of them. It's still a committee. James Cook seeing pretty much every red zone touch in his offense. We're going to go with Mike Evans at wide receiver. Great matchup, and we're assuming that he plays more snaps, runs more routes than he did last week. And we are going to go with Higgins as well. Implied team total 25 points here for the Bengals. It's a tough spot on paper against Pittsburgh, but sportsbooks are putting Cincinnati with that very high scoring mark, which makes sense with how good they've been this year. Now, Jelly Yam's coming out with our next question. I will say in general, my friend, before we even get into the exact players here, I hate these deals where it's like, hey, I'll trade you 4 of my best players. You give me 4 of your best players. Very rarely does this ever work out for both parties. Very rarely does this ever make sense. But you're saying top of my league. I also have Jefferson, Nico, Brees, and Joku looking for the best schedules rest of season. So Allen to Kyler. I know Kyler has a pretty decent playoff schedule, but still very clear downgrade. Bijan to Kamara, lateral move up to you. T. Higgins to Puka, big time upgrade. Rashad White to David Montgomery, big time upgrade. So I think we go with the Kamara, Montgomery, Puka, Kyler side. Obviously, I don't like tearing down at quarterback, but I think we upgrade pretty significantly at 2 other slots. So, but don't know if there's anything else to say with it. Again, I want to reiterate, I just typically don't like making the massive sides like that, swaps like that. Michael says, Kyler, Saquon Gibbs, AJ Hill, McBride, Rico, Jonnu on the bench. 8-4 is this too aggressive of a playoff move? Well, we upgrade from Tyreek to Kyron. Obviously, it's a little frustrating that you do have the Rams skewing a lot more pass happy in the red zone since you have the receivers back in. But still, Kyron gets every single snap in this offense. And then looking from Tyreek and Jonnu to DK Metcalf. Like, I don't even want to do that. Let's go Tyreek to Kyron, upgrade. Dowdle and Jonnu to DK. We have McBride, so there's no way in hell we ever start Jonnu Smith. See, I think this is not too aggressive at all. I think this is a very clear move to go get Kyron Williams and DK Metcalf. I think it's a great trade. Micro coming through with the start set question says 6-6, feeling good. Traded Mixon and Hopkins for Barkley. Just not sure if we should start JSN or a tight end. Okay. Yeah, you got to start JSN here. Brutal that we had both the Diggs and Godwin injuries. Obviously, love the Barkley trade. And then with JSN, this is now back-to-back weeks, or I guess 3 weeks. But obviously, 3 weeks ago, you had no Metcalf, so I don't want to read too much into it. But this is back-to-back weeks that we've had JSN leading this team in targets, receptions, receiving yards, fantasy points, pretty much any major statistical category. So, I don't know. I think you're in a really good spot here. Now, Jordan coming through with the start set question. Quarterback, we have Kyler, Bo Nix. You do have pretty good projections for this offense in Denver this week. You have an implied team total about 23.5 points for Denver, about 21 points for Arizona. The difference is I think you do have a little more rushing upside with Kyler than you do Bo. With the receivers here, I think you have to play Ladd. Actually, no. You still go Neighbors over Ladd. It freaking sucks. Pickens is a must-start option and a great matchup. And then going down to the flex between Ladd and Bucky, I think it's pretty damn close. Can y'all please spam the chat? Who would y'all rather have rest of season? Not rest of season, I apologize. Who would you rather have in the flex spot this week? Are you going to go Ladd McConkey against Atlanta, or are you going to go Bucky Irving against Carolina? Are you going to go Bucky or Ladd in the flex this week? We got Ladd, Bucky, 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 Bucky. Looks like the vast majority of people are on Bucky here, which is probably where I would go as well. Again, I don't want to rank Bucky as an RB1 by any means. You definitely have, he's the running back one in Tampa, but it's still very much a committee. But it's a phenomenal matchup, and you do really have nice projections here going up against Carolina. Now, Bijan Mustard, always happy to see us. Says 2 running backs are my whole team. Hard to pick up starting receivers. So we lost Godwin. We lost Downs. I think you go Harrison in an environment where they probably have to throw the ball against Minnesota. Amari, Jerry Jeudy is pretty close for me. I think we go with Jeudy. The only instance I'd pivot over to Amari is if you have both no Keon as well as no Kincaid. We're going to be going with Taysom Hill at tight ends. And down in the flex, you do have the Cowboys as pretty heavy favorites with Rico Dowdle looking at a strong workload. So one other note is I think we do cut Jake Ferguson. I don't really see the point of rostering 3 tight ends here. You're going to have to hold Ferguson through the injury when he comes back. You'll also have Brandon Cooks back, taking away a few targets. And obviously, what is a very, very bad offense. Now, McCaffrey's calf coming through says 7-5 in my league. League is very close. Places 1 through 7 are 8-4 or 7-5. Not sure about Tyreek in the cold weather. Yeah, the projections that you have with Miami this week are much lower than what you've had over the past 2. Like, I think you probably lower expectations across the board here with the Dolphins. Now, with that being said, I think I still probably play Tyreek Hill. The only instance I think I get away from this myself is if we end up seeing, say, Tajee Spears go down. I mean, obviously he's already down, but if Tajee Spears does not come back, then I think you could go ahead. I think you could pivot over to Pollard, who would just guarantee you 80+% of the snaps. Appa says, try to upgrade running back, quarterback, or ride it out. Thank you. Thank you. CMC to Barkley, clear upgrade. Ladd to Metcalf, lateral move up to you. We're paying Kyron to get it done. It's a 14-team league, so no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. If this is a 10-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format where it's all about going through and overpaying for the top-end stud and we don't necessarily care nearly as much about the depth, then yes, I think you can. Go out there and overpay for CMC. I'm sorry, go out there and overpay for Barkley, or quote-unquote overpay. Obviously, Barkley is by far and away the best asset in fantasy. The issue is, especially in a 14-team league, very, very easily, both McCaffrey and CMC are running back ones. So I think to go through and to trade them away for Barkley would just be extremely tough. Now, Eddie Haynes says, so I'm stuck on flex and who to use at tight ends. Tight end between Taysom, Hawkinson, and Goddard. I think you go Hawk. You did see a considerable bump in terms of what you had with the snaps and routes this past week, which obviously is very encouraging. The other thing that I would say here on this front is whoever you would rank as the worst guy, for me, it'd probably be Goddard. I think you maybe go ahead and cut. I really don't want to be rostering 3 tight ends. And then down in the flex, the issue is Neighbors plays on Thursday. So I think you go Neighbors. The only way I don't is if they tell us before the Giants game, Pacheco's going to be 100%, 0 limitations. I think you could make an argument to pivot over to Pacheco in a really strong game environment where they are heavily favored going up against the Raiders. But if we don't get that clarity before you have to make the call, obviously Neighbors is a safe play. Now, DW coming out with our next question. Here between Chuba, Connor, I think you have to go with Chuba Hubbard, where Brooks really did not have any role whatsoever this past week. And then I will go T. Higgins over James Conner in the flex, where obviously it's a tough matchup for both players, but you have just had an incredibly consistent workload with Higgins since he has been healthy in Cincinnati. I don't even know if workload's the right word for it, but I mean, if you remove the first game that he got back in this season, the man's averaging like 20 points per game. Now, Hoodie Meg coming out with our next question says 14-team league, 6-6. But on 5 GMWs facing number 1 team. Honestly, don't know exactly what that means, my friend. But I do know how to submit the starting lineup. So here we're going to go ahead. We're going to take Brees. McCaffrey, Chase Brown will be tough. Both running backs in really bad matchups against the Bills and the Steelers. If you had Purdy, it's a very easy call to go CMC. If Purdy misses and you really want to pivot over to Chase Brown, I think you can. Okay, we're on a 5-game win streak. Okay, perfect. Wide receiver, we are going to be going with Evans and Ladd. Down in the flex, we are going to go Taysom, drop Theo Johnson. And then we will go with Chase Brown. Tight end, we go Taysom, Chase Brown in the flex. So, yeah, I mean, this is an incredible team in a 14-team league. This is just an 100% I can see how this team is on a 5-game winning streak. If this is the team that we've had all year, you've dealt with some brutal injuries, but now we are at 100%. And we should be in a really good spot to contend right this second. Now, Tony Soprano coming through with our next question. Here we're looking at Bucky, Tracy, Brian Robinson. You go with Bucky given the matchup against Carolina. Tight end between Jonnu, Ingram, Taysom. I'm actually going to go Taysom with the Dolphins projecting out worse this week than they have over the past few. And then for the flex, I think we go ahead and take Jackson Smith and Jigba in a full PPR format. Obviously, don't necessarily want to go through and get super excited about Brian Robinson coming off an injury. Tracy in a garbage offense. I am not starting a tight end in the flex. And again, I wouldn't be a super big fan of rostering 3 tight ends either, to be honest. But these are all the questions that we have in the queue right now. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you sent in a question on the site, it should be answered very, very quickly. But R. Madams coming out says, in the playoffs, how important is elite quarterback in the playoffs? If Gibbs or Chase Brown instead of Hall change anything? Okay. Well, I would rank them Gibbs, Hall, Chase Brown. So I'd rather trade away Chase Brown than Breece Hall for sure. And having an elite quarterback for the fantasy football playoffs, that itself's not going to be like that different than the regular season. So I don't want to say having an elite quarterback is more important in the fantasy football playoffs, but what is less important in the fantasy football playoffs is having quality wide receiver and running back depth. because you will be through all the bye weeks. So you won't necessarily have to worry about who our first running back on the bench is or second wide receiver on the bench. So while elite quarterback itself isn't like especially important in the fantasy football playoffs, because the other assets on our team are maybe a little bit less important, it's easier to trade for the elite quarterback. So going from, say, Love to Hurts obviously is an upgrade. Dowdle, Deckler, downgrade. Brees to Lamb, downgrade. I mean, I would much prefer, I don't even want to say I would much prefer, F it. If you want to make this deal, go for it. I mean, yeah, if we are going to want to go through and change something, like if we could keep Dowdle and have them keep Eckler, where we send Love and Brees for Hurts and Lamb, I think it'd be a little bit better if we had to choose something. Now, Daboy Adden says, thoughts on James Conner rest of season? You're the man, Mason. I really appreciate you. So I have James Conner with my own team, and I am worried because you go through and you look at what we had 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, obviously excluding the bye. James Conner's role hadn't necessarily diminished on its own, but we had seen more Trey Benson. We had seen more Demercado. Like, it had been turning into a little bit more of running back by committee. It's not like James Conner was still seeing 80+% of the snaps in this backfield. But what I was saying is I was going, oh, okay, well, you know what? It has just been an absolute blowout here in these last few games with the Cardinals. Going into the future, maybe that's not necessarily the case. But this past week, the Cardinals lose, and you still had the other running backs touching the ball, which obviously was just extremely frustrating for at least myself having James Conner. Now, the saving grace that you have with Conner is he does have the best fantasy football playoff schedule of any running back in the NFL. At least if you're playing in a league where your fantasy football playoffs are weeks 15, 16, 17, which I hope that is what your setup is. That's what everybody's setup should be. So, like, for me, I'm holding on to James Conner with my own team, but I'm definitely concerned. Like, I'm ranking James Conner more as like a mid to low end RB2. Now, Carter1 coming through says, must win the next two for the playoffs. Teams linked. Taylor is a bye next week. Is it worth the upgrade at running back or no? No. What sucks is Jonathan Taylor is going to be in a much better spot going into the future than what he has been. Like, if we were still making buy low videos, Jonathan Taylor would be a very clear buy low candidate. Obviously, we've been very transparent about like the drawbacks with Jonathan Taylor, which include one, Anthony Richardson's lowered checkdown rate since he can run the ball himself. Two, the fact that Anthony Richardson will steal some rushing touchdowns to the goal line. Like, very, very negative drawbacks with JT. But at the same time, you can say the positive that you have with Jonathan Taylor is the fact that the matchups that you have going into the future are a lot better. Like this week, you have JT, and the Colts actually favored in their game, where it won't be a spot where they face a brutal Lions team where they have no option but to abandon the run. So I think Taylor will be better. But again, like, if you have to win the next 2 weeks and he's on week 14 bye, like, you would already have Jacobs ranked ahead of Taylor in our rest of season rankings, period. But Jacobs is well ahead of Taylor if you absolutely have to win the next 2 weeks. So I would love to keep Allen here if possible. It's a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format. Can we just throw a bomb over his way? Like, especially if this Smith hamstring is going to linger, I would like almost rather trade like Jonathan Taylor and Devonta Smith. Like, if it seems like Smith maybe misses another week and we need to win the next 2 weeks, I think holding on to Allen probably gives us a better shot here, to be honest. A-Rod, I'm surprised to hear that your playoffs start in week 14. You got to get that switched. And yeah, for anybody watching this, it's probably too late to get your league switched to a week 15 playoff as opposed to a week 14 one. But it's something that you need, like, because now obviously the majority of your fantasy football league mates are like still maybe paying attention, right? Obviously there are a couple, maybe there's a team or two that's completely out of it. But while everybody's still paying attention, you need to send a message in the chat and go, hey, let's get a vote right now. We need to change our fantasy football playoffs to weeks 15 through 17. Obviously, playoffs used to be weeks 14 through 16 in fantasy, and then the NFL added the other game. And when the NFL added another game, then teams started having the bye week in week 14. And you just simply can't have the fantasy football playoffs when a bunch of stud players are on bye. Now, Oppet coming through with our next question. Kyler, Herbert, quarterback. We're going to go with Kyler. Should be a worse offense, but you at least have a little more rushing upside. Running back, Chase Brown, tough matchup, but I mean, you're seeing 80+% of the snaps in one of the best offenses in the league. Going over to wide receiver. Ladd Harrison, very close. I would go ahead. I would take, actually not even close. I'd take Ladd. Harrison's just been so freaking buns. And then down in the flex, you take the 3-down running back. You had like 26 opportunities for Aaron Jones this past week. Seems like the usage 2 weeks ago from Akers was really just due to specifically Aaron Jones getting banged up 2 weeks back. I'm sorry, 3 weeks back. Now, Ahance is trading Bucky and JSN for Tracy and Lamb. Bucky to Tracy, lateral move up to you. Most people would rather have Bucky. JSN to Lamb, I'd rather have Lamb. So for me, personally, I would make this deal. But I'm telling you right now, probably a bunch of people in the chat would actually rather have the Bucky side of it, where obviously they are the two guys coming off the absolute banger performances. Okay. Now, our next question coming out from J.O. Daniel. 10-2 record, 12-team league. Nix, Gibbs, Jacobs, Chase, Cup, Bucky, and then on the bench, we have Rome, Keenan, CJ. Any trade ideas? If you want to try to send Rome and a Bucky to go get a top-end flex, Keenan and Bucky to go get a top-end flex. Because again, I do want to reiterate, I mean, if you're looking at Bucky Irving, incredible week this past week. Looks great. He has taken over as the RB1 in Tampa. Bunch of people are even more excited that he gets to play the Carolina Panthers this week. But still, again, I just want to reiterate, you had 4 rushing touchdowns in Tampa this past week. So, of course, in the game with 4 rushing touchdowns, Bucky Irving is going to go nuclear. trying to think if there's anything else to say. I mean, it would be different if Sean Tucker, like, I don't want to overstate the Sean Tucker impact. But the thing with Tucker as well is that rushing touchdown he took was at the beginning of the game. It's not like they had gotten so far ahead of the Giants. They're like, oh, put Tucker in. Take out Bucky. RBB says, in the hunt for the playoffs, who should we start? Higgins, Tyreek are pretty much back-to-back in our rankings this week. I still go Higgins over Tyreek. It's so damn close. Flex, you go Chase Brown. Chase Brown is the easy flex. If you didn't feel comfortable going with Tyreek, especially if the weather ends up being bad, then I think you pivot over to T. Higgins. Or definitely the Dolphins project out worse this week than they did over the past two. Okay. But I think that should be it for the questions that we've had in this live stream. Again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out and hanging out with us. As always, we'll be live late tomorrow night. I am traveling to New York for the holidays. It'll be my first time ever in New York, which I'm very excited about. So I have a flight tomorrow, but I will have rankings videos coming out tomorrow. Again, sorry for not posting a waiver wire video today. The waiver wire is absolute trash. Obviously, you can look at the backup running back in Washington, the backup running back in Los Angeles, but it's difficult to even talk about that when we don't know the extent of the injuries of Dobbins, Eckler, Brian Robinson yet. But I think that's all I got for y'all. Really do appreciate you, and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream tomorrow night.